It is now official, and so we are now recording this meeting where Randall Brandt will present our speaker today. So thank you all for coming, and look forward to a wonderful discussion.
Okay, thank you, Jose Adrian. So my name is Randy Brandt. I'm the head of cataloging at the Bancroft Library. And I want to just start by, in my introduction of Megan, just tell you a little story. So the first, it's actually a two-part story. So the first happened many years ago. I was sitting outside the library one afternoon having my lunch, and one of those campus tour groups came by of prospective students and their families. And the tour stopped right in front of the Bancroft Library, and the tour guide reached behind and said, "This is the Bancroft Library. Inside they have Mark Twain's papers and books bound in human skin. Moving along." And so spoiler alert, our speaker today is not going to be talking about Mark Twain. So our speaker today is Megan Rosenbloom. Megan is the Collection Strategies Librarian at UCLA in Los Angeles. And she previously served as a medical librarian and for many years, where she developed a keen interest in the history of medicine and rare books. She's also the co-founder and director of Death Salon and a leader in the death positive movement. She's also the author of a new book publishing next week, which is called Dark Archives, a librarian's investigation into the science and history of books bound in human skin. So Megan is also a 2011 graduate of the Rare Book Cataloging course that I teach for the California Rare Book School. And in fact, that course in 2011 was the first Cal RBS class that was taught outside of Los Angeles. So Cal RBS is located at UCLA, and now it has a very robust Bay Area presence. But in 2011, my Rare Book Cataloging class was conducted as an experiment to see if the curriculum could be exported to a different region. And that experiment faced a lot of unique challenges. So Rare Book Cataloging is, the class is actually a laboratory where we use actual rare books that we examine carefully and describe according to descriptive cataloging standards for rare materials. And all of the books that I normally used as laboratory books were still at UCLA. So when it came time to have them shipped to Berkeley, no one could find them. Nobody who was at California Rare Book School then is still there. So, and it's not their fault. It had just happened. Nobody could find the books. So anyway, that meant that I had to kind of scramble to find new books from the Bancroft Library's collections to use as laboratory books in the class. And sometimes we had to, find books during the middle of the week that would illustrate examples of whatever bibliographic details we were discussing at the moment. So while this made it a more stressful than usual week for me and stress that hopefully I was able to conceal from the students, it did mean that when a new book was needed, we did have a system in place to retrieve it fairly quickly. So when the topic of books bound in human skin came up for the first and so far only time in the history of Cal RBS Rare Book Cataloging, it was a relatively simple thing to get Bancroft's alleged skin book into class. So to set this, I hope sets the stage for what Megan's going to be talking to us about today. And so for the rest of that story, please join me in welcoming Megan Rosenbloom.
Thank you, Randall. I agree with Shannon. We could not tell at all that you were stressed out. Cool as a cucumber. While I'm getting ready to share my presentation here. Yeah, I have a lot of, hazy, misty memories from my California Rare Book School class. And one of them was just one of those times where you see something, well, for one, when we were getting a tour of the entire Bancroft building and we were on the top floor, there was what felt like to me as a relatively still new Angelino at the time coming from the East Coast, a massive earthquake. And I remember being, especially the person who was there from Chicago, I feel like she was completely green after that earthquake. I remember that very much. And I also just remember one of those very weird visual moments when I saw across the field outside of Bancroft, there were, I saw a tuba player walking across the field all by himself. And then I saw another tuba player from the other side walking across the field, and they met in the middle and high-fived and kept walking. Just little things that you remember. It was a wonderful, wonderful little Berkeley moment for me. Whoops. Okay. So thank you for the introduction. My name is Megan Rosenbloom, and I'll talk a little bit about my book, but I want to give you a little bit of background about, what even is this books bound in human skin thing. And then after that, I'll give a little excerpt. I'll read a little excerpt from my book that takes place in that very classroom that Randall mentioned, and then we can get to some Q&A. So this is the 50-cent phrase for books bound in human skin. It is anthropodermic bibliopegy. Anthro being human, dermic skin, biblio book, and pegi, but it's apogee. Pudgy is fasten or to bind. So human skin book binding. This photo is an example of a confirmed human skin book that is also the only picture of a book that appears in my book, Dark Archives. I did not include very many pictures of these books because part of what makes these books so creepy is that they actually tend to look very ordinary. If they're on a shelf among many other books, you would not, your eye would not generally be able to pick them out. And I actually think that's more creepy than looking like a Necronomicon or the Hocus Pocus book or something like that. But I find this one to be more just interesting looking. So I like to show that one, and I'll show a few more in this presentation as well. So ultimately, the story and the history of anthropodermic bibliopegy is one of the history of medicine. So why is that? The idea of clinical medicine, so before clinical medicine existed, medical training was basically apprenticeship, where people would study with, budding doctors would study with other doctors, and then they would usually work with a small group of people in a sort of private, serving a family or two, but not really working in hospitals or anything like that, because hospitals were charity places, usually run by churches, where the indigent would go to convalesce and hopefully, but often not, get better. Then at around the time of the French Revolution, although a lot of the other guilds and things were opening up, the rules around medical training were intentionally made more strict, that you would need to have scientific background, that you would be learning at a hospital, so you would see a lot more patients, and you'd be learning at the cadaver to see how things work inside your body. And then also you would have these new, at the same time you're getting these new diagnostic tools where you would be able to know things about a patient's body more than what they could tell you what was going on. And so one of the side effects of this definite advance and good thing about in the history of medicine was the development of what Michel Foucault called the clinical gaze, which is a way, a sort of, when you're seeing a lot of patients all the time in the busyness of the clinic, it can sometimes be easy to lose sight of the humanity of a patient when you're thinking about them on the level of organs and diseases to be cured, and then getting more and more minute, looking at cells and things like that. The more minute your gaze and the more abstracted your gaze becomes, the easier it is to forget that you're working with people. And doctors, have to continually kind of check back in with themselves about that. You'd need a certain amount of distancing in order to do your job, because if you're completely invested in everyone's lives, you just couldn't function if you had to, say, cut into someone or something. But there is a line, and what's the worst that can happen when this line is crossed? And also that doctors were becoming a sort of higher class gentlemen collecting things like art and rare books. When these forces collide, what you get is these unusual cases of the book bound in human skin. So this image is also from Brown's Hay Library, and this is Andreas Vesalius, father of modern anatomy, bound in human skin with both blind and gold tooling. So these books were basically rumors on library shelves for hundreds of years. And as Randall mentioned up top, with the idea of the campus tour guide, the scourge of the campus tour guide telling people, the only thing they have to say often about a library is that, oh, and there's a book bound in human skin, or there are books bound in human skin, the end, which is very annoying to librarians for sure. But also a lot of people would reasonably think, well, why is that even true? Do we actually even have a book bound in human skin? And if we do have one that has a note inside that says it's bound in human skin, which is usually the only thing that would tip you off about that, who wrote it at what point? So there are these sort of rumor, kind of creepy, quasi secrets or annoyances, depending on how you put it, in the library world and museum world until 2014. So Harvard University, there's a chemist named Daniel Kirby. He was doing some work with their preservation lab. And the head of the preservation lab asked whether some of the chemistry tests he was doing on, say, like 10th century Coptic, manuscripts, that whether they could be applied to alleged examples of books bound in human skin. So he tested their 3 alleged books. 2 of them turned out to be of sheep origin, not human. And then this one pictured here turned out to be actual human skin. The news of this kind of sent shockwaves through the library world, because it's the first time we know definitively that that there was at least one book that was actually human skin. And it was quite, controversial. So I went to Harvard to talk to everybody, to see all the books, the real ones and the fake ones, and learn about them. And then I interviewed the chemist, Daniel Kirby, and here he is with this little Eppendorf tube with a tiny little sample of a book inside, doing his sampling at a proteomics lab at Harvard. And so we started comparing notes about other alleged examples we had heard, and then we joined forces with the curator at the Muir Museum, and then we created this sort of interdisciplinary team called the Anthropodermic Book Project, where we tried to identify as many alleged human skin books in public library and museum collections as possible, and test as many as we could to discern the genuine human skin books from the fakes. So how the science works is you take a teeny tiny itsy bitsy piece of the leather binding. If it's big enough for your eye to see, it's plenty big. Like that little speck above Abe on the 1 cent piece would be plenty of material needed for to conduct this test. So yes, it's technically invasive, but what is invasive, there tends to be a line, and would you actually notice that small of a piece actually came off of a book? Probably not. So then that teeny little piece gets put in that Eppendorf tube. It gets digested in a enzyme called trypsin. Trypsin, I think. Okay, I think I'm forgetting the name right now. But it gets digested and then put through a mass spectrometer. And then what comes out are these sort of graph looking things that show you that that match a library of previously collected samples that correspond with certain kinds of animals. So you can see the top PMF result that shows markers for human collagen. It's the collagen, the protein, that gets tested. It's not DNA. Collagen lasts a whole lot longer than than DNA or other things generally, especially, and it can hold up to a lot more damage over both time, but also harsh chemical processes like leather tanning. So you've got the human, it shows the human collagen, or a collagen of a great ape family. And then down below, you see the most likely fraudulent human skin book is usually made from sheep. So you can pretty easily discern the differences there of what it's made out of. So for the Anthropodermic Book Project, although we are now doing also some non-book testing and some non-public collection testing for private collectors, for the public libraries and museums, we've identified 50 individual books that have an alleged human skin provenance. And of those books, we've tested 31 of them, and 18 have been proven to be human skin, and 13 have been proven to be other animals. So I only recently came to the UC system. I am now a Bruin at UCLA as of July. So mid-pandemic, but before that I was at USC, but I also was able to arrange, I did come visit this book at UCLA to do a test on it. So this book, you can see it is a 17th century book that has a number of notes inside that allude to a human skin binding, but also certain provenance information about being owned by Bignon, who was Louis XV's librarian. He comes up a lot when it comes to these French Revolutionary era skin book claims. And then the French on the side says Relia un peu humain, binding in human skin. And then this book was also owned by James Westfall Thompson, who was a professor at UC Berkeley. And he was a historian, a medievalist, but also wrote a lot about the French Revolution and the history of literacy. So you could see why he might be interested in such an item. It was in his private collection. He gave it to UC Berkeley, and then through the magic of the UC system, it ended up at UCLA Library. You can see at the top, there is a protective box that the book is in, and it says right on the box, human skin binding. Well, when we tested it, it turned out to not be real. And that has also been the case with every other French Revolutionary book that we've tested, including the one at Bancroft Library. So that will bring me into my little excerpt that I'll read for you, which is from chapter 2 of my book. The chapter's called This Dreadful Workshop. And I will switch over to, there we go. Thanks to Randall for providing photographic evidence here through the sands of time. And I don't know if you can tell this, you probably can't, but I am extremely happy in that photo. I am like, my body, I can tell by my body posture and everything that I am just like over the moon pleased to be looking at these rare books in Rare Book School. So here's my little excerpt from the book. California Rare Book School is as nerdy as it sounds, which is why I couldn't wait to go. Just 2 years into my librarian career, and long before I visited Harvard, I was thrilled to spend a whole week in the rare book cataloging course at the University of California, Berkeley's Bancroft Library, teasing the secrets out of ancient books with monkish attention. Every day, my classmates and I were presented with cradles full of leather-bound, tooled treasures to investigate, counting the sheets of paper that had been folded and cut into gatherings called signatures, making note of disordered or missing pages, and discovering scribbles in the margins from readers hundreds of years dead. The pages, more rag than wood pulp in those days, made a glorious sound when we turned them, like boat sails bracing against the wind. We held each page up to the light to reveal more secrets, white apparitions of lions, crowns, and other insignia that were the watermarks of paper makers. We used their position on the page and the direction of accompanying faint white lines left by the chains on the papermaking frame to conclude whether the pages were folded just once, folio, twice, quarto, or more times before they were cut and bound into the books in our hands. While we worked on these materials, our professor, Bancroft's head of cataloging, Randall Brandt, indulged our chatter. We shared the dream books that we wished our institution owned. Like I said, nerdy. I was the only medical librarian there, so the visions of Kelmscott Chaucers dancing in my classmates' heads, however lovely, just didn't fit into my version of a fantasy shopping spree. My thoughts drifted back to those strange little leather books, covers closed, that I had encountered at the Mutter Museum of the College of Physicians of Philadelphia. Given their peculiar pedigree, they would make for memorable props in teaching medical students about the history and ethics at the center of their profession. With trepidation and a fear of alienating myself from our small cohort, I mentioned these books. There was a quiet moment, and Brandt lifted his head from his work and said thoughtfully, I think we have one of those. Brandt can be forgiven for not being sure. Bancroft Library's 5-story building full of primarily special collections includes the offices of the Mark Twain Project, the main repository of thousands of writings by and about the iconic American humorist, and an entire center devoted to the largest papyrus collection in the United States. On tours of the facility, the rows of rare book stacks appear endless. Thanks to a not quite legal parking job and the subsequent towing, I was late to class the next morning. I burst through the door, sweaty and embarrassed. It was not easy to sidle in unseen with only a few people in the quiet room. The books were out on their cradles and the other students were already working. On my cradle sat a pocket-sized book with a fairly modern-looking black pebbled cover. Only the hint of the patina on the ornate silver clasp suggested its age. Brandt gestured at the book as I was picking it up. "So I found that skin book for you," he said. I'm holding human leather in my bare hands. I thought to myself, don't freak out, don't freak out. It's funny how accustomed to it I would one day become. I was staring down at L'Office de l'Église en François, which is, it says Francois, but you know, it's an old way of spelling it. It's a little prayer book in Latin and French. The text block appeared well worn, but the binding was not, implying that the binding was put on sometime after the 1671 printing of the text. Inside the book were two inscriptions, in pencil and in English. The first was bound in human skin. The second, quote, "It is a matter of fact that during the horrors of the French Revolution, tanneries were established in various parts of France where the skins of the victims of the guillotine were tanned, and some of these were used to bind books on account of the fine-grained surface exhibited after being curried. This is one of these books." I was confused. At the time, I was still under the impression that only a handful of 19th century doctors had made these macabre objects, and that the College of Physicians of Philadelphia contained exceptional examples of this bizarre practice. Here I held one from a completely different time period and country, purportedly made for political reasons. I formed a mental picture of the clergyman or aristocrat who owned this book, executed by the sans-culottes. Was the holy book I held in my hands bound in human skin, perhaps that of its former owner, who was deemed an enemy of the state? If so, this was the most profane object I had ever encountered. As a new librarian, enamored with the magical physicality of antique books, I was hooked. I would come to discover that the Berkeley book was far from the only French Revolutionary era book carrying this eye-popping accusation. Alongside the incredible but true accounts of French Revolution's mass death and destruction, falsehoods spread like the fires set by torch-wielding mobs throughout the villages of France. Everything anyone knew under the monarchy was being challenged and dismantled. Not only were the social structures of artisan guilds, universities, and the aristocracy stripped of their authority, their physical structures were gutted and repurposed as well. On a hill overlooking Paris from the southwest, the Chateau de Meudon, once a resplendent hunting lodge for Louis XV and Louis XVI after him, was ransacked by the new regime to be used for revolutionary aims. The nature of those aims has been debated for centuries. As the bodies of the executed piled high throughout France, stories have propagated about Republican generals sporting culottes made of human skin as they rode into battle, and a cemetery ball where the guests were gifted human skin-bound copies of the rights of man. If the revolutionaries actually wanted to create that many objects from human skin, artisan tanners would not be up to the task. They would have needed something more akin to a factory to meet their demands. Luckily for them, the country was newly industrializing. That factory was allegedly housed in the castle at Meudon. The abbot of Montgaillard is often cited as the source of the Meudon tannery rumors. Abbot Guillaume Honoré Roch de Montgaillard worked on an epic multi-volume history of France up until his death in 1825. His son, Jean-Gabriel Maurice Roch, Count of Montgaillard, finished the work and published it in 1827. On a page detailing wartime technological advances, the history mentions that a new method of tanning was discovered that could fashion in just a few days leather that previously took years of preparation. An accompanying footnote translates as, quote, people tanned at Meudon human skin, and out of this dreadful workshop came the most perfectly prepared skins. The Duke of Orleans, Philippe Égalité, had human skin pants. The good and beautiful corpses of the tortured were skinned, and their skin tanned with particular care. The footnote goes on to note the high quality of man leather, but that women's skin wasn't as strong because of its softness. Whether this footnote was from the abbot or added by his son is unknown, but it should be noted that the Count of Montgaillard shared his father's monarchist zeal and was a secret agent on the royalist side during the Revolution and beyond. The entry in the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica warns that the Count's subsequent memoirs are, quote, must be read with the utmost caution. Some moderate newspapers balked at the scandalous accusations like these, but the rumors persisted. Even today, the alleged human skin tannery at Meudon is stated as fact in most writing about the practice of human skin bookbinding and in other historical accounts. Quote, few histories of the Revolution omit references to the infamous royalist propaganda to the effect that a gigantic human skin tannery at Meudon filled all the requisitions for the leather goods needed by the Revolutionary Army quartermasters, wrote the librarian Lawrence S. Thompson, a prescient mid-20th century skeptic in this historical debate. So what was really going on at Meudon? There were secret machinations, to be sure, but more of the standard military variety. We know that under the guidance of the engineering genius Nicolas Jacques Conté, the Committee of Public Health converted the chateau's ample gardens into shooting ranges where they conducted ballistics testing of various kinds. They also explored using the new technology of hot air balloons for military purposes. When the National Convention was replaced in 1795 with a new 5-person government called the Directory, one of the last acts of the Committee of Public Health was to clear out all of the workshops from Meudon, allowing only the École d'Aération, the section experimenting with hot air balloons, to remain. Into the 20th century, the most credible chroniclers of this era's skin book rumors began to cast aspersions on the more outlandish claims of the Meudon tannery, graveyard dances, and flesh culottes. Many of them still argued that the practice did occur during the Revolution, pointing to one book as the most likely genuine article, a copy of the Constitution of 1793. The book is stored at the Musée Carnavalet in Paris, a museum dedicated to telling the story of the city through its art and cultural artifacts from the Renaissance onward. Perhaps the book's detailed provenance made it seem credible to those writing about skin books before they could be tested, but only a test can confirm or deny the claim. So when we tested this book for Berkeley, it turned out to be horse, made of horse leather. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Megan. That was fantastic. Really glad that it's not bound in human skin, because then if I ever touch it, I don't want to have that on my hands. But thank you so much. And yeah, we're gonna go ahead and open it now to the Q&A. So we're gonna stop the recording, and then yeah, so that anyone who has any questions, please chime in. You're allowed to unmute yourself, and yeah, please ask away.
So